So now coming to requirement lifecycle management. This is one of the important knowledge areas. So what do you mean by requirement lifecycle management? So as the name suggests, it's the management of requirements throughout the lifecycle of the project which you are working on. So it talks about how do we handle requirements right from elicitation stage till the retirement stage. So retirement stage is the stage after which the requirements are not going to be used. Okay, and it will also be involving activities which are related to the instances where a customer is coming to you saying, okay, we want to change in the existing requirements, we want to add new requirements, we want to eliminate certain requirements. All of that will be part of requirements lifecycle management. These are the tasks which are part of requirement lifecycle management: tracing of requirements, maintenance of requirements, prioritization of requirements, the impact analysis, which is the assess requirements change, and approval of the requirements. These are the 5 tasks which are part of this knowledge area. So let's look at each one of them one by one. So tracing requirements is one of the tasks in the knowledge area called requirement lifecycle management. So what do we mean by tracing of requirements? Tracing of requirements has multiple purposes, and these forward and backward traceability are one of the important features in the management of requirements. Okay. What do you mean by forward traceability? What do you mean by backward traceability? We are going to understand it very soon. The third aspect of tracing of requirements is you should be in a position to track or trace or have an assessment of what is the impact if one of the requirements get either changed, eliminated, or there is some new requirement which is going to have an impact on this requirement from all sides. What any kind of a modification or any kind of a change in the existing set of requirements, what is going to be the impact of that in the entire system, or there is no impact. Either ways, that is the idea behind tracing of requirements. What do you mean by forward traceability and backward traceability? Let's have a look at it. So first, let's look at some of the very old techniques which the office documents were kind of applied upon. How do you manage documents in an office? Okay, there are multiple things which are used. One is the simple box set, which is an outward and inward. So if you go to any government office in India and any British kind of ruled states, because they have learned from the Britishers, you'll see these kind of boxes, outward, inward. So anything which is going to go out is put in an outward box. Anything which has come into the organization will be put in the in box or the inward box, and people will start picking it from there and start documenting as to what has come, what was the purpose, and it will go to the appropriate section of the office. That used to automatically trace everything. Just think about it. If you are sending some letters, who will keep track whether the letter was sent or not? So the person who is going to take and send it somewhere will then put it in a register saying that today I have sent this, which was supposed to be sent to this organization, and it was sent by this person. So that automatically created traceability from both sides, whatever was going out, whatever was coming in. Very simple yet extremely effective way in the olden days. Second part was indexing of the documents, whatever was being kept in the archives. So if you are having an office where your documents are maintained from, let's say, last 20 years even, and somebody comes in saying that, okay, this was my file, how will you search? Go to any property registration office. Every day there are tens and hundreds of registrations happening for leave and license as well as for the sales and purchase. And out of this, if you want to search something, how will you search? There are thousands and thousands of files. There's absolutely no way if somebody tries to start searching from one to the last to find out the correct file. There has to be some kind of an indexing. So that's why these kind of boxes were used with letters or years, whatever mechanism people found to be more appropriate. So the entire concept of traceability and easy search is nothing new. It is being used for many decades. Now things are getting computerized and things are getting automated, things are becoming intelligent. So you have better mechanisms to search things, right? So if you look at the traceability part of it, what do we mean by forward traceability? Forward traceability is when from the need stage, you're able to see how it has been implemented. So I had a need saying that I want to improve my sales process, or I want to improve my leads management process. How it has been implemented in the solution? Did we really achieve this? Or did we really fulfill this need? Then that traceability. So from business need, let's say business need number 1, and you can see that there are 10 elements in the solution which are going to address this need. Then you can trace it forward and say, yeah, okay, this need has been fulfilled properly. That is the idea behind forward traceability. So it's as simple as you're having one requirement, you map it to a screen, you map it to a table, you map it to certain procedures, maybe triggers. All of that is a forward traceability. Okay, so forward traceability is maintained in a document called requirement traceability table. Okay, or it can also be maintained in a document called backlog, which is product backlog and sprint backlog in Scrum. Then the reverse of the forward traceability is backward traceability. So the relationship remains the same, there's no change, but now look at the scenario where you are going to change one of the table fields. Now you want to know how this table field change is going to impact any of the other requirements in the entire system. You possibly can't remember everything, and without any proper technique and methodology, it's impossible to trace backward. And that's one of the biggest problems in the software industry. I have seen hundreds of instances. Even when I'm doing consulting, even then I'm seeing this, that users generally report saying that I had asked for this change, this is done, but now my other screen has stopped working. Because there is no backward traceability. We don't know that if we change one particular field in the table, where all is going to impact. There could be reports. If it's an important table, there are hundreds of reports which are running on the basis of this. Or there are other transactional screens which are going to be impacted. So backward traceability has to be an extremely systematic approach to managing the relationship amongst the requirements. And one of the simplest technique is, of course, again, RTT and backlogs. There you maintain the relationship amongst the requirements. So forward traceability and backward traceability, both of them are typically maintained in the same document. Okay. So what kind of relationships we are talking about? There are multiple relationships amongst the requirements. Okay. One is called derive. That means if one requirement is getting generated from the other requirement as part of an implied requirement, that is where the implied requirements come into picture. So something has been stated as a requirement by the customer. From there you figure out that, okay, it automatically means this is also to be done. Okay. For example, we saw one example of the transfer of the employees. So if somebody says that whenever some employee is getting transferred, we need to maintain the date of transfer and the department of transfer. Now, one of the simplest implied requirement is you need to maintain the date of joining of employee, right? Because that is the first step from where you can then relatively measure for how many days an employee was in a particular department or at particular location. It also means that you have to maintain the locations of the organization. These are implied requirements, and that's what categorized as derive. Depends. That is, if one requirement is dependent on the other. So, in any kind of a situation, there could be hundreds of dependent requirements. But then, even that can be categorized in two things. One is called necessity, other one is called effort. These are all straightforward ones. Necessity is when the requirements, the dependency is of necessity. So one cannot be done without the other. Okay, like in the same employee example we were talking about, if you're not capturing the location, you cannot fulfill the requirements of managing the transfer. You need to have location. That's a necessity and a dependency relationship. Effort is more like a facilitation work. So if you have some requirements, maybe some other requirement might make it easier for you to manage that. Okay, so this could be, for example, if you want to maintain standard look and feel when the text line height in your pages, right, so that it appears everywhere in the same manner. So the best way to do is you have your classes defined in your CSS file, so that you use the class and you have a standard line height across the board rather than going and changing it in every page. But if you maintain it in every page, it's not that it's not going to work, but then the effort will be higher if you have to change it. But if you have it in the CSS class, it's so simple. Just change it at one place and it's done. That's the effort kind of a relationship. So relationships could be of multiple types. Two of these are derive and depends. Other one is satisfy. Okay, so satisfaction is basically when one requirement is going to be fulfilled when the other requirement is also completed. Okay. However, that requirement because of which one requirement is getting completed or fulfilled may not be a requirement of this system. I mean, when you say may not be a requirement, it does not mean that it's not a requirement. It means that it may be out of the scope of this system, right? So for example, if you are going to manage the timesheet system, okay, then the login and logout timing may not directly come from the requirements or something which is to be done in your system. You already have a swipe machine. Most of the companies now have. So there will be a dump which will be coming from that door access system, or it could be online depending on what kind of sophistication you have there. So that's a satisfactory or satisfaction level of relationship between the requirements. Another example which is mentioned here, a login screen can fulfill the requirement of allowing authorized login into the system. And that login screen could be something which is already developed in some other module. Then validate. That's another relationship where you are now trying to figure out how something is going to be validated. Right? So if you remember, validation is something which is related to connectivity of a requirement to the business goal. Okay, and that's why Babok guide has not left it to testing as such. So if you look at the Babok guide, there's no chapter on testing. Okay, there's absolutely no separate mention of a task saying testing, which is a separate knowledge area. It's all connected in the requirements chapters only. So here in the last section yesterday, we saw there's a verification and validation, which is part of the requirement analysis, design, and definition. They have not separated it. So that's why you can see this relationship here saying that there could be relationship amongst elements in an RTT showing there is a validate dependency or there is a validate relationship between the requirements. So a test case is a simple example of that kind of a relationship, which is going to validate. Okay, so this is about traceability and the different kinds of relationship amongst the requirements. Now, these are things which are not very common in the industry right now. So, if any one of you have seen RTT, you will not find all these relationships. Okay, there are very few relationships which are existing. Typically, in RTT, you have just a mention of which requirements are connected to the other requirement, and then we do away with this, because once you select a requirement saying that this is the requirement in which change is going to happen, you will get a listing of all the other requirements, and then it's up to the technical guys to determine what kind of an impact it is going to be, whether it's going to be really an impact or it's just an association. But the overall scope of the work is these kind of relationships which you saw just now. Okay, so now where do we maintain the traceability and how do we manage the requirement traceability? So there is something called requirement traceability tool or requirement traceability table, which can be used to manage the forward and backward traceability. Okay, so RTT is one of the most common documents in the software projects, but most of the times it is ignored. It is not maintained. So what does a typical RTT captures? It has requirements listing, it has priority for each requirements, it has relationship amongst requirements, design element which is going to map to the requirement, coding unit, test cases, UAT test cases. So it's a complete kind of a blueprint of your entire system with fully qualified relationship amongst the requirements.